Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. So today, we're diving straight into a really fascinating framework proposed by John Cashotte. It's designed to tackle something we all know way too well, that daily chaos of knowledge work. He calls it the Office Execution System, or OES for short. If you've ever felt like your workday is just, one long, uncoordinated scramble, stick around because we're going to break down exactly how this source material proposes we actually fix it.
All right, let's kick things off with a pretty massive question. Why is it that the factory floor runs almost flawlessly, but the office basically runs on endless email threads, right? It's a classic tale of two cities situation. Think about it. You walk onto a modern manufacturing floor and every single movement is deliberate. But then you step into the corporate office and it kind of feels like the Wild West. We're going to look at exactly why there's this huge execution gap between the folks making the product and the folks managing the business.
Okay, moving into section 1, the manufacturing standard. To really understand how this material suggests we fix the office, we actually need to look backward for a second. We have to see how factories solved this exact same problem like over 40 years ago.
So for decades now, manufacturers have leaned heavily on what's called a manufacturing execution system, or MES. This is the system handling the heavy lifting. Core functions like production scheduling, figuring out resource allocation, grabbing data in real time. It's handling quality management and ensuring complete traceability from start to finish. Basically, the factory learned a long time ago that you simply cannot leave execution up to habit or, just remembering how to do it. It has to be strictly controlled and measured exactly where the work is actually happening.
And this right here really shines a light on that massive execution gap we're talking about. Down on the factory floor, you have these incredibly disciplined systems, MES, SCADA, PLCs, and they are literally turning engineering intent into reality. But up in the office, we have multi-million-dollar business processes running on a chaotic patchwork of email threads, messy spreadsheets, and siloed software tools. The factory uses a rigid system to control execution. The office, well, it relies on institutional memory and basically just crossing our fingers and hoping for the best.
Which brings us to section 2, the knowledge work chaos. Let's take a look at how this huge discrepancy translates into the modern, everyday chaos so many of us experience.
Zero. Yep, zero. That is, historically speaking, the exact number of dedicated execution systems built for non-manufacturing departments. Think about marketing, HR, sales, finance. Sure, they have these massive enterprise planning systems and they've got their individual tools like a CRM or a giant spreadsheet. But they have zero execution layers sitting in between. And because of that missing layer, the office is just plagued by the exact same variability, the same rework, and those hidden invisible costs that manufacturing completely eliminated a generation ago. But now, it's happening at a massive enterprise scale, entirely within knowledge work.
All right, section 3, meet the office execution system. According to John Chatz's material, the Office Execution System, the OES, is designed to swoop in and be that missing execution layer for all these non-manufacturing functions. It literally translates factory floor logic directly into the corporate environment. It's so cool to see how perfectly these concepts map over. So in a factory, you've got production scheduling, right? Well, the proposed OES equivalent for the office is work and case orchestration. That's taking things like sales leads or service tickets and routing them to the exact right person at the exact right time. Factory in-process quality, that becomes embedded approval gates for things like quotes or contracts. And factory traceability seamlessly translates into a full compliance audit trail for legal and finance, so you know exactly who approved what version and exactly when they did it. The underlying logic wasn't just made for machines, it actually applies to absolutely any repeatable work.
So what does this actually look like for these departments in the real world? Well, take marketing. Under an OES, campaign development follows strictly defined routings, just like a work order in a factory. It gives the marketing team a concrete routing sheet complete with embedded approval gates. Or think about sales. The whole journey from getting a lead to generating a quote to signing a contract, that's essentially just a production line with a variable yield. An OES dispatches those leads, it enforces pricing gates, and it captures all that critical win-loss data right at the point of decision, exactly like an MES dispatching work to a machine on the floor. Whether it's purchasing, engineering, HR, or finance, they all become controlled, measured, and most importantly, repeatable. Moving into section 4, deploying with the IPE framework. So the big question here is, how do you actually build this thing? I mean, having a neat concept for an OES is great and all, but just talking about a concept doesn't install a working system. And that is exactly where IPE comes in.
Integrated Process Excellence, or IPE, is the specific deployment framework designed by CareShade. Its whole purpose is to bridge that fatal gap between, just having a process documented on some dusty wiki page somewhere and actually deploying it into reality. It takes those loose, informal office tasks and turns them into controlled, measured, and governed execution.
The best part? You absolutely don't have to start from a blank page. Look, an OES is really only as useful as the process content you load into it. That's why this framework relies on what are called IP Packs. You can think of these as pre-built, function-specific libraries of process intelligence. Much in the same way a routing library populates a factory system, these IP Packs serve as the ready-to-deploy content layer to instantly power up your marketing, sales, or HR OES. Now, these packs are built on a very specific process hierarchy. It basically takes this big, abstract knowledge work and breaks it down. It goes from the top-level 1.0 area down to the 1.1 activity, and then all the way down to the super granular 1.1.1 element. This hierarchy is absolutely crucial because it gives every single office process the exact same structural discipline that a rigid MES routing demands on the plant floor. The framework lays out a really definitive 6-step deployment procedure. You start by creating a positive environment. Then you define, document, and communicate the process. But things get really interesting at step 5, measure and control. This step uses an architecture called KIV, KPV, and KOV. That stands for key input variable, key process variable, and key output variable. The genius here is that instead of just looking at lagging outcomes, like, hey, did that deal finally close, it measures the causal process inputs in real time. Then, step 6 takes all that execution data and feeds it right back in for continuous improvement, ensuring your process never, ever drifts.
All right, section 5, preparing for AI agents. So beyond just saving time and cutting down on rework, the source material points to a very modern and honestly very urgent challenge: getting the workplace ready for AI. Here is the reality. AI needs strict, governed boundaries to execute safely. Just think about it for a second. An autonomous AI agent simply cannot function in the chaotic, completely undocumented environment of most modern offices. If you hand an AI tool a messy, 20-deep email thread or some informal process that literally only lives in Jim from accounting's head, you are risking wildly unpredictable, unconstrained actions. AI demands the structured boundaries, the specific routings, and the strict version control that an OES provides. John Kashat actually puts it perfectly in the source material, and I think this is a really powerful thesis for us to remember. He says, a process that is only documented and not deployed into execution will not perform consistently and cannot be safely handed to an autonomous agent. So establishing an office execution system isn't just about efficiency anymore, it is positioned as a fundamental survival strategy for the AI era. You absolutely have to have a defined, versioned, auditable boundary if you want AI to operate safely. Which brings us right to our final question for you to chew on. Is your office actually ready to execute, or are you just handing AI your chaos? It's time to take a hard look at your own company's readiness. Are your knowledge workers operating with true precision, or are they really just relying on hope? The execution gap is incredibly real, and this framework offers us one very compelling blueprint to finally address it. Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. I'll catch you next time.